That summer was supposed to be the best one of our lives. It was the first summer after graduating high school, and probably the last one before we all went our separate ways to college or work. It felt like freedom. Endless nights, empty roads, no rules. In Wyoming, there's this thing we do every year, a kind of rite of passage for graduates. We drive out to the plateaus, climb up one of the rocky faces, crack open a few beers, and watch the sun go down. It's meant to be a celebration, daring, wild, but safe enough to feel like a victory lap before adulthood. It was me, Alex, Nick, and Jack. Alex was our driver. She had a beat-up Jeep she worshipped, perfect for off-road trails. She never drank, which worked out for the rest of us since we were planning to drink on top of the plateau. That afternoon, we drove out past Flaming Gorge and took our time picking the perfect spot. The wilderness felt endless, just miles and miles of empty road and rock and sky. Eventually, we spotted a formation just off Highway 141 that looked perfect. The climb was easy enough. 15 minutes of careful handholds and steady scrambling. Alex went first, then me, then Nick, with Jack taking up the rear. When we reached the top, we were breathless but laughing. The view stretched out forever. The plateau was so quiet, so far away from everything. We opened our beers, talked about dumb memories from school, joked about who would be the first one to get married or move away. Everything felt so right, until I noticed the truck. It was a red pickup barreling down the empty highway. Something about the way it moved caught my attention. Too fast, too reckless. It passed Alex's Jeep, then suddenly skidded to a stop right there on the asphalt. My stomach tightened. Guys. I pointed. We all went silent, watching as the truck slowly reversed down the highway, its tires crunching against gravel as it backed into the lot where we'd parked. Probably just another climber, Nick said, but I could tell his voice didn't sound convinced. We watched as a man stepped out. From up here, he was just a shape. Tall, broad-shouldered, a baseball cap pulled low. At first, he just stood there like he was listening. Then he started walking slowly around Alex's Jeep. He didn't just glance inside. He cupped his hands against the windows, peering in. Then he tugged on the door handle. "That's not right," Alex muttered, already on edge. Nick stood up and shouted, "Hey!" The man stopped moving and looked around. After a few moments, he spotted us on top of the plateau. Then, disturbingly, he raised one hand and waved. That was the moment I felt it. The first ripple of real fear. If he had been innocent, he would have backed off, maybe shouted an apology. But he didn't. He kept circling the Jeep, looking at it like it was his. Jack made the mistake of shouting, "We're armed!" At first, the man didn't react. Then he tilted his head, almost playfully, and shouted back, "Me too, kiddo!" He held something up, a flash of metal glinting in the setting sun. A gun. We froze. Then, as if things weren't bad enough, he started slamming his shoulder into the Jeep's window. Over and over. The sound of shattering glass echoed up the plateau. Alex screamed at him and we all joined in, yelling, throwing rocks, anything to get him to stop. Then we started climbing down as fast as we could. That climb, it felt like it lasted forever. My hand slipped on the rock more than once, scraping my palms bloody, but I didn't stop. By the time we made it to the ground, we were sprinting full speed toward the Jeep. And then, he turned toward us, raised the gun, and aimed. We skidded to a stop. "Drop your phones and wallets," he shouted. We didn't even argue. One by one, we tossed everything onto the dirt. He kept the gun trained on us while he crouched to collect them. That S when I finally got a good look at him, and I wished I hadn't a T. He was older, maybe late 50s, his face sunburned and cracked like old leather. His beard was thin and scraggly and his eyes were just wrong, lifeless. He looked like someone who hadn't smiled in years, maybe decades, and he was calm, too calm. He slashed Alex's tire with a knife, tossed our stuff into his truck and climbed in. But before he left, he did something I'll never forget. He smiled at us. Not a normal smile, slow, deliberate, showing too many teeth. Then he drove off. We stood there in shock for what felt like forever, until Alex finally snapped out of it and yelled at us to help her change the tire. We worked as fast as we could, but the entire time I felt like we were being watched, like he might come back any second. The sun was going down fast, and every sound made us jump. When we finally got the spare tire on, we jumped in the Jeep and sped down the highway, hoping to catch him, but he was long gone. By the time we made it back to Alex's house and called the police, it was full dark outside. We gave them everything we remembered: the truck, the man, the missing license plates. They nodded, took notes, but I could tell by the look on the Officer S' face they weren't going to find him. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him standing there in the gravel lot smiling. The next morning we went back to the plateau to see if we could find anything he'd dropped, anything that might help. What we found still haunts me. In the gravel right where we had been standing with our hands up, someone had drawn a circle with a cross through it, carved deep into the dirt with a knife. It hadn't been there the day before. And just beyond the lot, in the brush, we found the carcass of a deer, freshly killed, its belly split open, its eyes missing. That was the last time any of us ever went rock climbing, and sometimes when I'm driving late at night on an empty highway and a truck pulls up behind me with no plates, I swear I see him again, smiling in my rearview mirror. Before starting the next story, first tell me in the comments where you're watching from and at what time. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. That way YouTube will keep showing you more stories like this. Now, let's begin. Story No. 2. My name is Sophia. This happened 3 years ago when I was 19. My older brother Luke had just graduated from college in California, and we were driving cross-country back home to New Jersey. Luke had been living in California for 4 years, and he had an entire apartment's worth of stuff: furniture, electronics, boxes of books, and shipping everything was too expensive. Instead, he rented a U-Haul and I agreed to ride along. For me, it wasn't just about helping him move. It was an adventure. I had never been to Arizona, New Mexico, or Texas before. We planned a road trip route that would take us through the Grand Canyon, Zion, and a bunch of scenic back roads. It was supposed to be the best summer ever. Before we left, though, our dad sat us down and warned us about New Mexico. He told us not to stop in any small empty towns if we didn't have to, and if we did, to stick to big gas stations and get back on the highway as quickly as possible. At the time, I laughed it off. The first few days were incredible. We hiked Zion, watched the sunset over the Grand Canyon, and ate at tiny roadside diners. But somewhere along the endless stretch of highway in New Mexico, we realized we hadn't planned for the U-Haul's awful gas mileage. The gauge dropped faster than expected. Our GPS said the next real gas station was still 40 miles away, and Luke didn't think we'd make it. There was a small town about 10 miles ahead with a gas station, so we had no choice but to stop. The town felt wrong the second we pulled in. It wasn't abandoned, but it was eerily quiet. No music, no kids playing, no dogs barking. A few figures moved slowly along the sidewalk, almost like they were watching us. The gas station was one of those single-story buildings with peeling paint and old pumps that looked like they hadn't been replaced in decades. Luke got out to fill the tank while I stayed inside the truck. That's when I saw him. A man leaning against the wall of the convenience store, smoking, staring straight at us. He never looked away. Every time I glanced back, his eyes were locked on me, unblinking. By the time Luke got back in the truck, I was tense all over and told him we needed to leave right away. He agreed, started driving toward the highway, and that's when things got strange. We could see the highway from certain intersections, but every road we took seemed to lead us further away from it. We kept ending up back at the same streets, the same rundown church, the same boarded-up houses. The GPS wasn't helping. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it would freeze. And when it did work, it tried to route us down dirt roads that didn't exist anymore. It felt like we were being led in circles. The deeper we drove into the town, the heavier the air felt. It wasn't just quiet anymore. It felt hollow, like we weren't supposed to be there. I started shaking. Luke's jaw was tight. After half an hour of this, he said we were going back to the gas station to ask for directions. I begged him not to, but he said we were wasting gas and getting trapped deeper in this place. He went inside, leaving me alone in the truck. I couldn't stop glancing at the mirrors, at the empty streets, half expecting something to move. When Luke came back, his face was pale. He said the clerk told him to drive 17 miles in the opposite direction from the highway to get back on an on-ramp. I stared at him, confused, asking why we'd go the opposite way when we could literally see the highway from town. Luke said the man had been overly confident, repeating the directions like he needed Luke to believe him. While we sat there deciding what to do, I noticed a car parked at the edge of the lot behind us. Its engine was running, but its windows were too dark to see through. I pointed it out, and Luke immediately drove away. We turned down a side street to figure out what to do next. I was trying to control my breathing when I heard a truck approaching. A dusty pickup slowed beside us, and the driver rolled down the window. He asked if we were lost. Luke hesitated, then said we were trying to get back to the highway. He mentioned the route we had been told to take. The man's tone changed instantly. He asked if we were out of our minds to even think about taking that road. He told us it led to a remote area known for drug trafficking and worse. People sometimes went missing out there. He gave us a different set of directions and told us not to stop for anyone. Before we could thank him, he drove away. Luke immediately hit the gas and followed the man's directions. The gravel road he told us to take was almost hidden, easy to miss if you weren't looking. As we drove, I kept checking behind us. At first, there was nothing. Then I saw headlights far off in the distance. Luke drove faster, pushing the U-Haul as hard as it would go. The road was rough and every bump felt like it might shake the truck apart. The headlights behind us got closer. My chest tightened so much I could barely breathe. Finally, just when I thought we'd never make it, we saw the on-ramp. Luke turned hard, the U-Haul skidding in the gravel as we shot up onto the highway. The headlights stopped. When I looked back, I saw two figures standing in the middle of the dirt road just watching us. We didn't speak until we crossed into Texas. When we finally did, Luke said we were never talking about this to Mom and Dad. We didn't. Not for years. Even now, whenever I pass a lonely desert town, I think about that place. I think about the road the clerk wanted us to take, and sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had. Story No. 3. 5 summers ago feels like a lifetime now, but I still remember every detail like it happened yesterday. My girlfriend at the time, let us call her PS, and I had just graduated college. Well, she had just graduated. I'd finished the year before. Back then, we were in love, broke and excited about life in a way you can only be at 22. PS had always dreamed of going to Europe. Her grandmother was from Croatia, from a small port city called Rijeka, and she had grown up hearing bedtime stories about cobblestone streets, markets near the water, and salty sea air. She said that after graduation, no matter what else was going on in our lives, she was going to go there. And if you knew PS, you knew she meant it. So we made it happen, barely. We couldn't afford nice hotels, so we booked the cheapest Airbnbs and budget hostels we could find. We flew into Zagreb, explored Dalmatia, and ended with a 2-night stay in Rijeka. That last part was supposed to be the highlight of the trip. The first day was quiet but pleasant. Rijeka wasn't like the tourist-packed cities we had just been in. It felt more raw, more local, and more watchful. People stared at us in a way I hadn't experienced before. Not just curious glances. Their eyes lingered, long enough that I started wondering if we'd accidentally offended someone. PS brushed it off. She was thrilled just to be there, practicing her Croatian, chatting with shopkeepers, smiling at everyone. I followed her lead and tried to ignore the prickling feeling in my gut. The next afternoon, we decided to walk outside the city center to find a small restaurant someone at our Airbnb had recommended. It was only supposed to be a 15-minute walk. The further we went, the quieter it got. By the time we reached the place, the streets were nearly empty. The restaurant itself looked plain. One of those places that didn't need to advertise because locals already knew it was good. Inside, it smelled amazing. We ordered too much food and split a cheap bottle of wine, laughing about how perfect the day had turned out. Then the door opened. 5 men walked in. Rough-looking, loud, the kind of men you avoid making eye contact with in any country. They sat just 2 tables away and started talking in Croatian. At first, PS kept chatting with me like nothing was wrong, but I noticed her getting quieter, her shoulders tense. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. When I asked what was wrong, she didn't answer at first. Then she leaned across the table and said very quietly that we needed to leave right now. I thought she was overreacting, but her face told me otherwise. I tossed enough cash on the table to more than cover the bill and followed her outside. Only when we were a block away did she finally explain. She'd understood what the men were saying. They were talking about us, about separating us, about what they'd do once we were apart. She wouldn't tell me all of it, but I could tell it wasn't just crude talk. These weren't fantasies, and these were plans. I looked back toward the restaurant and froze. The men were standing outside now, staring at us. And when they saw me looking, they smiled. Not nice smiles. Slow, deliberate, predatory smiles. We started walking faster, then faster still. Then we were running. I could hear their footsteps behind us, not rushing, just following almost casually like they knew we wouldn't get away. The street seemed longer now, darker somehow, as if we wandered into a part of the city that didn't want us there. Every turn we took felt wrong. Every shadow looked like someone waiting. Finally, after what felt like forever, we saw other people ahead, a couple walking a dog, a man getting into his car, and just like that, the footsteps stopped. I risked a glance back. They were still there, standing at the corner, just watching us, not coming closer. We didn't stop until we were back in the city center. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it was going to break my ribs. PS was shaking. We ducked into a cafe and tried to calm down. An older man at the next table overheard us and asked if we were okay. When PS explained what had happened, his expression darkened. "You shouldn't go to that part of town," he said, his voice low. "Especially not foreigners." When PS described the restaurant, his face went grim. "That place is not safe," he said finally. "Not for people like you." That night we locked ourselves in our Airbnb. We pushed a chair under the doorknob. At one point we heard footsteps in the hallway outside our room, slow, deliberate, and someone stopped right in front of our door. Neither of us breathed. After a minute, the footsteps moved away. We left Rijeka the next morning without speaking to anyone. We didn't even look back. The rest of our trip was ruined. We barely left our rooms in the other cities we visited, too shaken to enjoy anything. Even now, years later, I think about that night. I think about those smiles. I think about the sound of footsteps outside our door. And sometimes I wonder, if we'd stayed in that restaurant even 5 minutes longer, if we'd taken one wrong turn, if we hadn't run quite fast enough, would we have made it out at all? Story No. 4. It was supposed to be the perfect summer. 3 of us, me, my best friend Claire, and her cousin Marcus, had been planning this trip for months. A road trip across the coast before we all went our separate ways for college. The kind of trip you look back on years later and say, that was the best summer of my life. Everything started off fine. We drove along the beach towns, stayed in cheap motels, took too many pictures, ate too much junk food. By the 3rd night, we'd made it to this quiet coastal town in Oregon. The place looked like something out of a postcard. Colorful houses, fishing boats in the harbor, pine trees rolling down to the ocean. We were supposed to stay at a motel, but when we got there, they had double booked our room. Claire was furious, but the owner offered us something even better. An old vacation cabin just outside of town. He said it was part of the same property but rarely used, perfect for guests who wanted privacy. If this had been a scary movie, we would have turned around right then. But we were tired, it was late, and the cabin was free. So we said yes. The place was about a 10-minute drive down a narrow, winding road into the woods. When we pulled up, it looked exactly like you'd imagine an old summer cabin to look. Peeling paint, creaky wooden porch, dusty windows. But inside, it was cozy enough. There was a single bedroom with 2 small beds, a couch, and a kitchen with just enough supplies for a night or two. We laughed about how creepy it was, made some ramen noodles, and stayed up playing cards and talking. Around midnight, Marcus said he was going outside to smoke. Claire and I were still sitting at the kitchen table when he came back inside with a strange look on his face. "There's someone out there," he said. We both froze. He said he'd seen a figure standing at the edge of the trees, just far enough away that he couldn't make out their face. He thought maybe it was a local just out for a walk, until the figure slowly stepped backward into the shadows, like they didn't want to be seen. We tried to laugh it off. It was dark. Maybe he was just seeing things. But Marcus swore he wasn't imagining it. That night, none of us slept well. Every sound outside felt louder in the cabin. The wind in the trees, the creak of the porch steps, the occasional knock of something against the wall. At one point, I was sure I heard footsteps crunching slowly across the gravel driveway. When morning came, everything felt normal again. Sunlight made the cabin seem almost charming. We told ourselves it was just nerves and decided to spend the day exploring town. But when we got back that evening, something was different. There were wet footprints on the porch, bare footprints, leading right up to the front door. The three of us stood there staring at them, our bags still in our hands. Marcus swore he had locked the door when we left. Claire was shaking as she unlocked it again, and sure enough, everything inside looked exactly the way we'd left it. Almost. There was a single seashell sitting on the kitchen table. None of us had put it there. Marcus wanted to leave right then, but it was getting dark and the nearest hotel was 40 minutes away. Against my better judgment, we stayed another night. That was the longest night of my life. Around midnight, we heard it again. Slow, deliberate footsteps outside. Crunch, crunch, crunch. They circled the cabin, then stopped. Claire whispered that we should turn off the lights, so we did. We sat there in the dark, barely breathing. Then came the sound of the porch steps creaking. Whoever it was, they were right outside the door. There was a long pause. Then, 3 slow knocks. Not loud, just soft enough that we almost convinced ourselves we hadn't heard them. Marcus grabbed a kitchen knife. Claire clutched my arm so hard it hurt. After what felt like forever, the footsteps moved away. We heard them disappear into the woods. None of us slept. The next morning, we packed the car in record time. As we were leaving, I glanced back at the cabin one last time. And that's when I saw it. There was something carved into the wooden door. Deep scratches, almost like letters. It said, "Come back tonight." We drove straight out of that town and didn't stop until we were hours away. When we told the motel owner what had happened, his face went pale. He said the cabin hadn't been rented out in years, not since a man went missing there one summer and was never found. He offered to refund our money, but we didn't care about that. We just wanted to get as far away as possible. To this day, none of us knows who was outside that cabin, or what would have happened if we'd stayed. Story No. 5. We had been waiting for this trip all year. Every summer, my family would rent the same beach house on the Outer Banks. It was tradition. Long days in the sun, fishing off the pier, bonfires at night. But this summer, my parents couldn't come. They were busy with work, so they told me I could invite a couple of friends instead. I brought Ethan and Sarah, my 2 closest friends. We were all 17, just old enough to feel like adults, but still young enough to be stupidly fearless. The house sat right on the edge of the dunes, far enough from the nearest neighbor that at night it felt like we were completely alone. The first night was perfect. Music blasting, laughing until our stomachs hurt, staying up way too late. But on the second night, everything changed. Around 2 a.m., Sarah woke me up. She said she'd heard someone whispering outside her window. I figured it was just the wind or maybe a drunk tourist on the beach, but she looked pale. We all grabbed flashlights and went outside to check. There were no footprints in the sand, no sign of anyone. But when we went back inside, we found something on the porch. A dead fish. It wasn't one of ours. We hadn't been fishing yet. And it wasn't just lying there randomly. It was placed carefully, right in the center of the porch, head pointed toward the door. Ethan tried to laugh it off. "Some local kid messing with us," he said. But Sarah didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next day, we tried to forget about it. We spent hours on the beach, played cards, made burgers. But when the sun went down, we all felt tense. At exactly midnight, we heard it again. That whispering sound. This time, Ethan swore he saw someone moving near the edge of the dunes. Just a dark shape crouched low, watching the house. We locked all the doors and windows and stayed in the living room together, too scared to sleep. Then came the knocking. Not on the door, on the windows. One by one, soft taps, moving around the house in a slow circle. Tap, tap, tap. Sarah started crying. Ethan grabbed a kitchen knife and shouted for whoever it was to leave us alone. Silence. Then, a sound I will never forget. A voice, just outside the window, whispering all of our names. It didn't sound angry. It didn't sound human either. I wanted to run, but we were trapped. We turned off every light and sat in the dark, clutching each other, waiting for it to end. Hours later, the first light of dawn came through the windows. We finally worked up the courage to look outside. The sand around the house was covered in footprints, bare footprints circling the house over and over, and right outside the front door, written in the sand with a stick, were 4 words. We know you're alone. We left that morning. Didn't even pack properly. We just threw our stuff in the car and drove until we were back in the city. The beach house is still out there, but I will never go back. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear that whispering. Story No. 6. I used to think summer camps were supposed to be fun. Bonfires, late-night ghost stories, canoe races. You know, the kind of stuff you see in movies. But last summer at Camp Wren Hollow wasn't anything like that. It was supposed to be my last summer there before going off to college. So I signed up to be a junior counselor. I thought it would be an easy gig. Watching kids swim, handing out s'mores, maybe sneaking off to hang with the other counselors when the kids went to bed. But from the very first night, something felt wrong. The cabins were exactly as I remembered them, but the forest felt different. The air was too still, and at night the crickets would just stop chirping, all at once. It would go completely silent for minutes at a time, like the whole woods was holding its breath. The first weird thing happened on night 3. I was walking back from the mess hall with 2 other counselors when we heard a child crying somewhere in the trees. It sounded close, but when we went to look, there was nobody there. We searched for nearly 20 minutes, calling out, shining our flashlights into the trees. Nothing. The camp director, Mr. Grady, told us to forget about it, said it was probably a prank by one of the kids. But that night, after everyone was asleep, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my cabin. Not just one pair, several. I got up, peeked through the blinds, and froze. There were children standing in the clearing, at least 5 of them. Their faces were turned toward my cabin, but they weren't moving, just standing there completely still, barefoot, wearing what looked like old-fashioned nightgowns. When I blinked, they were gone. The next morning, I asked the other counselors if they'd heard anything. Nobody had. By the end of the week, more strange things started happening. One camper woke up screaming, claiming someone had been standing over his bed. Another swore she'd seen a little boy peeking through the window. And every night, without fail, I would hear that crying in the woods. One night I decided I'd had enough. I grabbed a flashlight and followed the sound. The crying led me deeper into the woods than I'd ever gone before. My flashlight beam barely cut through the darkness, and I kept hearing twigs snap behind me like someone was following. Finally, I reached a clearing, and there it was, an old, half-buried well. The crying was coming from inside it. I leaned closer, and that's when I saw them. Small, pale hands gripping the stones from the inside, like something was trying to climb out. I stumbled back, tripped over a root, and ran all the way back to camp without looking behind me. The next morning, I told Mr. Grady what I'd found. His face went pale. He told me quietly that the camp had been built on the ruins of an orphanage that burned down in the 1940s. Most of the children had died in the fire, and their bodies had never been recovered. The well was the only thing left standing. I wanted to leave that day, but he convinced me to stay until the session ended. On the last night, we had the traditional bonfire. Everything was going fine until the fire suddenly died out on its own. The night went completely silent, and then, from the darkness, dozens of small figures stepped into the firelight. Children. Their faces were gray with ash, their hair burned away, their eyes hollow. They surrounded the fire pit, staring at us. The campers started screaming, Some ran. I couldn't move. One of the children, a little girl missing half her face, pointed directly at me, and then just like that they were gone. The next morning camp was shut down, permanently. The owners told everyone it was for financial reasons, but I know the truth. I still dream about those children, and sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night I swear I hear crying. Faint, coming from somewhere far below my house, like through the floorboards. Story No. 7. Last summer I went on a road trip with my cousin Derek. We'd been planning it for months, 2 weeks driving through small towns and camping along the Appalachian backroads. It was supposed to be our great adventure before college. On the 5th night we were running behind schedule and decided to skip the next big town on our route. We found a tiny side road that led to what looked like a decent camping spot on the map, near a creek, surrounded by thick forest. When we got there it was completely silent. No sound of cars, no crickets, no wind. I should have taken that as a warning. But we set up camp anyway, made a fire, cooked some noodles, and cracked a couple of sodas. Sometime around midnight, Derek said he thought he saw someone standing in the tree line. I shined my flashlight where he pointed. Nothing. Probably an animal, I said, but we both knew it didn't feel like that. A few minutes later, we heard it, a low whistle coming from the dark. Not a bird, not a coyote, a human whistle. Then another, from the opposite side of the clearing. Derek grabbed the hatchet we'd brought and I threw dirt on the fire to put it out. We sat in the dark, barely breathing, listening. Crunch, footsteps, slow, deliberate. Whoever it was, they were circling us. We stayed like that for over an hour, whispering to each other, trying to decide whether to run or stay put. Finally, everything went quiet again. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew it was dawn, and Derek was gone. I called his name until my throat hurt, checked the tent, the trees, the creek. Nothing. The only thing I found was a small pile of stones, stacked neatly in the center of the campsite. They hadn't been there the night before. I grabbed what I could carry and ran back to the main road. It took me almost 2 hours to flag down a car. When I got to the nearest town, I went straight to the sheriff's office. They sent a search team out that afternoon. They didn't find Derek, but they did find more of those stone piles leading deeper into the woods like a trail. After the 3rd day, they called off the search. They told me it was probably a wild animal attack, but I know what I heard that night. And every summer since, I get a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside, just a piece of paper with 3 words. Come back alone. Story No. 8. 2 years ago, I took a summer job as a house sitter. It was an old farmhouse outside a small town in Virginia. The owners, an older couple, told me they'd be away for 6 weeks visiting their daughter in Florida. The place was huge. Creaky wood floors, narrow staircases, and way too many empty rooms. On my first night, I kept hearing the floorboards upstairs creaking. I told myself it was just the house settling. But it happened again the 2nd night, and the 3rd. Always the same sound. Slow, careful footsteps pacing the upstairs hallway. The weird thing was, the dogs would hear it too. They'd both sit at the bottom of the stairs, staring up, growling low. One night I worked up the nerve to check. I grabbed a kitchen knife, went upstairs, turned on every light. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but the air was cold, like someone had just been standing there. By the 2nd week, I started waking up at exactly 3:13 a.m. every night, to the sound of someone walking. Then one night, I woke up to something else, breathing. Right outside my bedroom door. Slow, steady breathing, like whoever it was knew I was awake. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. After what felt like forever, the breathing stopped and I heard the footsteps retreat down the hallway. The next morning, I found something on the kitchen table. A photograph. It was a picture of me, sleeping. My blood ran cold. I called the couple immediately and told them I couldn't stay there anymore. That's when the wife told me something I'll never forget. She said I wasn't the first house sitter to leave early. The last girl who stayed there vanished completely. The police searched the entire house and property but never found her. Before I could say anything, the wife said something that made me drop the phone. She said, If you see her, don't talk to her. Don't look at her face, just leave the house and don't come back. That night was my last night in the house. At exactly 3:13 a.m., I woke up again. This time my door was wide open, and standing in the hallway was a girl, barefoot, her hair hanging over her face. She didn't move. She didn't make a sound. She just stood there until the sun came up. When I finally got up the courage to leave my room, she was gone. But on the wall outside my door, written in what looked like charcoal, were 3 words: "Don't leave yet." I packed my bags and ran. I never went back. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still wake up at 3:13 a.m., and I swear I can hear footsteps outside my bedroom door.